Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone. You don't actually want closure. You want acknowledgement. You want the moment where someone looks you in the eyes and says, what I did, I see how it hurt you, and I am sorry. But here's the paradox. The people who owe you closure are often the least capable of giving it. And so you wait. You wait for a text that never comes, for a conversation that keeps replaying in your head, for an apology that exists only in the version of them you wish were real. You tell yourself, when I get closure, I'll finally move on. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Closure is not something they give you. It's something you build without them. And that's terrifying because it means healing doesn't depend on their remorse. It depends on your courage. If you have ever stayed emotionally tethered to someone long after they walked away, if you have ever rehearsed a final speech in your mind, you have believed that one honest conversation would fix the 8. This is for you. Emotional intelligence is not just the ability to understand your feelings. It's the willingness to sit with them when no one else validates them. We live in a culture obsessed with closure. Movies promise it. Therapy buzzwords sell it. Social media romanticizes it. We've been conditioned to believe that healing requires a clean ending, an apology, a final explanation, a neatly tied emotional bow. But vulnerability research tells us something different. Healing doesn't begin when someone confesses their wrongdoing. Healing begins when you stop outsourcing your peace to someone who may never be self-aware enough to offer it. And that requires a kind of bravery that feels almost counterintuitive, because vulnerability isn't chasing the last word. Vulnerability is grieving the version of the story you wanted and accepting that you may never get it. Closure feels empowering in theory, but in practice, the pursuit of closure can become a quiet form of emotional dependency. You tell yourself you're seeking clarity, but sometimes you're actually seeking permission to let go. And permission from someone who hurt you is rarely coming. You have felt this. You've imagined sitting across from them, calm, collected, saying everything you never said. You picture them finally understanding. Their face softens. Their voice trembles. They admit what they did. In your fantasy, that's the moment the weight lifts from your chest. But here's what we don't talk about. The people who lack accountability rarely transform under confrontation. And when you build your healing around a hypothetical transformation, you trap yourself inside their emotional limitations. Closure assumes mutual emotional maturity. But what if the person who hurt you doesn't possess the capacity for self-reflection? What if they defend instead of apologize, minimize instead of validate, blame instead of repair? You walk into that final conversation hoping for relief, and you leave feeling smaller, because now you're not just grieving what happened. You're grieving the fact that they still don't see you. It's like knocking on a door that has no one home. The silence echoes louder than the pain itself. And so you tell yourself, I just didn't explain it well enough. You rehearse better arguments, better wording, a softer tone. But the truth is this: when someone lacks empathy, No amount of perfect phrasing will unlock it. Closure isn't blocked by your communication skills. It's blocked by their capacity. And here's the hardest part to swallow. Sometimes the final conversation you're craving is not about clarity, it's about control. If they admit they were wrong, then the story makes sense. If they apologize, then your pain feels justified. If they validate you, then you can finally trust your own memory. But emotional intelligence asks a deeper question. Why does your self-trust depend on their confession? You don't need a courtroom verdict to confirm what your nervous system already knows. You were hurt, and your pain is valid, even if they never admit it. You have told yourself, I just need them to own it. And that sounds reasonable, mature even. But let's gently examine what happens when your healing becomes conditional. When you wait for an apology, you place your peace in someone else's timeline. You delay your growth. You delay your forgiveness. You delay your freedom. It's like standing at the edge of a river, waiting for someone on the opposite bank to build the bridge. They may never pick up the tools. Meanwhile, your life is paused. Research on rumination shows that replaying unresolved conflict intensifies emotional distress. Your brain searches for a conclusion because humans crave narrative coherence. We want beginnings, middles, and endings. But trauma doesn't respect storytelling rules. Some chapters end abruptly. Some apologies never arrive. Some people rewrite history to protect their own ego. And when that happens, you're left holding the emotional debris. You might say, but I deserve an apology. You do, but deserving something does not guarantee receiving it. And here's where vulnerability becomes radical. Can you validate your own pain without their acknowledgement? Can you say, it hurt, without needing them to agree? Because when you wait for their apology to confirm your worth, you unknowingly hand them authority over your healing. You turn them into the gatekeeper of your closure. But here's the truth that changes everything. An apology does not create healing. Accountability does. And accountability doesn't require their participation. It requires yours. Your accountability is not about blame. It's about ownership. Ownership of your boundaries. Ownership of your exit. Ownership of the decision to stop knocking on a door that has stayed closed. You are not weak for wanting closure. You are human. But healing begins the moment you realize the peace you're waiting for is not hiding in their apology. It's waiting in your acceptance. There is a specific kind of grief no one prepares you for. It's not just grieving the relationship. It's grieving the version of the person you believed existed. You have done this. You've held onto the memory of who they were at their best. The thoughtful moments, the tenderness, the promises, and you've told yourself that's the real them. So when they leave without accountability, when they rewrite the narrative, when they move on as if nothing happened, it doesn't just hurt. It destabilizes your sense of reality, because if they can walk away without remorse, then who were they? And what did all of it mean? This is where closure becomes seductive. You believe that if they would just acknowledge the harm, the story would make sense again. The chaos would organize itself. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the apology you're waiting for would not soothe you. It would only expose how emotionally unavailable they truly are. And that realization is devastating because it forces you to let go of the fantasy that they might one day become who you needed them to be. Psychologically, we call this ambiguous loss. There's no funeral, no formal ending. The person is gone or emotionally gone, but the attachment lingers, and without an apology, the loss feels unfinished. But what if the healing isn't in finishing the story with them? What if the healing is in finishing it within yourself? Grief becomes powerful when you allow it to shift from why didn't they apologize to why did I expect emotional maturity from someone who consistently showed me they didn't have it? That question isn't self-blame, it's self-awareness. And self-awareness is the foundation of emotional intelligence. You can mourn what you hoped for. You can mourn the version of them that existed only in potential, but you don't have to keep waiting for them to validate the loss, because the loss is real, even without their confession. Let's talk about something deeper than apology. Let's talk about self-trust. When someone hurts you and refuses accountability, something subtle happens. You start doubting yourself, you replay conversations, you soften your memory, you ask, was it really that bad? And if they minimize the harm, that doubt intensifies. Closure, in many ways, is an attempt to restore your internal stability. You want confirmation that your feelings were justified. But here's the courageous shift. Instead of asking, will they admit it? You begin asking, do I trust what I experienced? That's the pivot, because healing without an apology requires you to become your own witness. You have to look at your pain and say, I believe you, even if they don't, especially if they don't. And this is where vulnerability becomes transformative. It takes courage to admit, I stayed longer than I should have. It takes courage to admit, I ignored red flags because I wanted the connection. It takes courage to admit, I kept waiting for a version of them that never arrived. But notice something, none of that requires their participation. It requires honesty with yourself. The myth of closure tells you that peace comes from confrontation, but often peace comes from quiet acceptance, from deciding, I no longer need this person to agree with my reality in order for it to be real. That's not denial. That's self-respect. And self-respect is the kind of closure no one can take from you. There is a moment in healing where the energy shifts. You stop rehearsing what you would say. You stop checking if they've changed. You stop imagining the apology. And instead, you begin asking different questions. What did this teach me about my boundaries? What did this reveal about my needs? Where did I override my intuition? That shift is subtle, but it is revolutionary, because now your growth is no longer tethered to their awareness. It belongs to you. Closure is a myth not because endings it don't matter, but because the ending you're waiting for may never come. And when you accept that, you stop chasing resolution. You start reclaiming power. Forgiveness without reconciliation is one of the most misunderstood emotional decisions you will ever make. You were likely taught that forgiveness means restoring access. That if you truly forgive, you reopen the door, you answer the calls again, you allow the same closeness to resume, you move on together. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not twins. They are distant relatives. Reconciliation requires mutual accountability. It requires changed behavior. It requires safety rebuilt through consistent action. Forgiveness requires only one participant, you. And that distinction is everything. You have probably wrestled with this internally. A part of you wants peace. A part of you wants justice. A part of you wants them to feel the weight of what they did. And another part of you is simply tired of carrying it, so you hesitate. If I forgive them, you think, does that mean what they did was okay? No. Forgiveness does not rewrite history. It does not reduce the harm. It does not erase the impact. It simply releases you from the expectation that the past can be undone. You can forgive someone and still decide they no longer have access to your life. You can forgive someone and still refuse to tolerate the behavior again. You can forgive someone and still acknowledge being around you is not emotionally safe for me. That is not hypocrisy. That is emotional maturity, because forgiveness is about internal freedom, not external reunion. When you hold on to resentment, it feels powerful at first. It feels like armor. It feels like proof that what happened mattered, and it did matter, but resentment has a cost. It keeps the wound active. It keeps the story looping. It keeps your nervous system braced as if the betrayal is still happening. Forgiveness is not about absolving them. It is about regulating yourself. It is the moment you decide, I refuse to let this experience define my future relationships. I refuse to let bitterness shape my personality. I refuse to let pain become my identity. And that decision is deeply vulnerable, because without resentment, you feel exposed, the anger fades, and underneath it is grief, sadness, disappointment, the ache of unmet expectations. Anger is loud, grief is quiet. Forgiveness asks you to sit with the quiet. You have felt how uncomfortable that is, as the moment when you stop rehearsing arguments and instead face the truth. They may never understand the depth of what they broke. You will still survive. Forgiveness without reconciliation is the acceptance that you cannot force insight into someone who resists it. It is acknowledging that accountability cannot be extracted through persistence. It is the radical act of saying, I release you from the role of becoming who I needed you to be. That doesn't mean you trust them again. Trust is earned through consistency, through repair, through evidence. If those elements are absent, reconciliation is unsafe. Forgiveness does not demand you override your boundaries. In fact, true forgiveness often strengthens them, because once you release the emotional charge, you see more clearly. You are no longer trying to prove your worth. You are no longer trying to win the moral argument. You are no longer trying to get them to validate your pain. You simply recognize what is, and sometimes what is incompatibility, emotional immaturity, chronic defensiveness, a pattern that will not change. You can forgive that without returning to it. There is profound strength in walking away without hatred, not because they deserve kindness, but because you deserve peace. Forgiveness without reconciliation is not weakness. It is restraint. It is clarity. It is choosing your nervous system over your ego. It is the understanding that closure does not require their participation. It requires your decision to stop carrying what no longer serves your growth. And that decision is yours alone. One of the quiet fears you rarely say out loud is this: if I let go, will I lose my softness? You don't want to become cynical. You don't want to harden. You don't want to turn into someone who distrusts everyone just because one person mishandled your heart. So you hold on a little longer, because detachment feels dangerous. It feels like it might turn you into someone unrecognizable. But emotional detachment is not the death of love. It is the death of illusion. There is a profound difference between closing your heart and closing a door. Closing your heart says, no one gets in. Closing a door says, not everyone gets access. You have likely confused the two. Detachment is not indifference. It is not pretending you never cared. It is not emotional numbness. It is not cold silence meant to punish. Detachment is clarity without hostility. It is when you stop trying to extract warmth from someone who repeatedly shows you they cannot offer it. It is when your nervous system finally exhales because you are no longer trying to manage someone else's emotional limitations. You have felt the exhaustion of over-functioning in a relationship, explaining, clarifying, reassuring, overextending. Detachment begins when you notice how much energy you've spent trying to stabilize something that was never steady. And instead of blaming yourself or blaming them, you simply step back. There is no dramatic announcement, no fairy speech, no slam doors, just a quiet internal shift. I can love you and still choose distance. That sentence is powerful because distance, when rooted in self-respect, is not cruelty. It is regulation. When you remain attached to someone who invalidates you, your body stays on alert. You scan for tone shifts. You anticipate conflict. You prepare for disappointment. Detachment is when you stop scanning. You stop over-interpreting their silence. You stop analyzing their mixed signals. You stop trying to decode their inconsistency. You let their behavior speak for itself. And here's what's beautiful about that. You don't have to harden to detach. Hardness is reactive. Detachment is intentional. Hardness says, I will never trust again. Detachment says, trust will be earned. A hardness builds walls out of fear. Detachment builds boundaries out of wisdom. You can still be warm. You can still be generous. You can still be emotionally available, but you are no longer available for disrespect. That is not coldness. That is growth. There's a tenderness in healthy detachment. It looks like this. You wish them well, but from afar. You release the need to monitor their life. You stop hoping they will finally become the version you imagined. You accept who they have shown you they are. And acceptance, while painful at first, is stabilizing. You don't have to rewrite them as a villain. You don't have to erase the good memories. You simply acknowledge the full picture. You can hold compassion without sacrificing discernment. You can say, I understand why you are the way you are, and still add, but I cannot participate in this dynamic anymore. That is emotional maturity. Because true strength is not measured by how much pain you can tolerate. It is measured by how honestly you respond to it. Detachment also protects your future self. When you step back from unhealthy dynamics, you create space for relationships rooted in reciprocity, in safety, in accountability, and that space requires softness. Coldness pushes everyone away. Healthy detachment filters. It does not shrink your heart, it refines it. You remain open but not naive, compassionate but not self-abandoning, loving but not desperate, and perhaps most importantly, you no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. The drama fades, the chaos quiets, the emotional roller coaster slows. What remains is steadiness, and steadiness may not feel as intoxicating as turbulence, but it feels safe. It feels sustainable. It feels like peace. Detachment without becoming cold is the ardor of walking away with your warmth intact. It is choosing yourself without closing yourself. It is saying quietly and firmly, I will not shrink my heart. I will simply place it where it is honored, and that is not hardness. That is wisdom. Let's come back to the beginning. You thought closure would come in the form of a conversation, a confession, a tearful apology, a final explanation that made everything make sense. But what if the closure you were searching for was the moment you stop chasing it? The moment you say, I may never get the apology and I am still allowed to heal. That is radical self-trust. That is emotional maturity. That is vulnerability at its deepest level, because you are choosing to validate your own experience without external confirmation. And here's the truth that changes everything. Closure is not a gift someone hands you. It is a boundary you draw. It is a story you rewrite. It is the decision to believe yourself. You don't need their remorse to move forward. You need your courage. So if you are still waiting, still replaying, still hoping, let this be the turning point, not because they finally apologized, but because you finally chose yourself.